FFX here. Welcome to a new video. Today I'm gonna be showing you how to identify breaker blocks. What are breaker blocks? Breaker blocks are basically breakout bars that price tends to respect in key reversal areas or zones. To sketch it out in more detail, when price violates a high like this low is regarded as a displacement low, right? We call it a displacement low. So once price violates this low right here, it tends to go back as a form of a retest to continue bearish, if that makes any sense. In other words, price violates buy side, and then tends to go back into the breakout area or the displacement area to retest the zone and then continue going bearish or bullish, vice versa, if the was the other way around. So a breaker block is basically the last bearish candle on this low. So basically, the last bearish candlestick that forms on this low right here, we regard that as a breaker block. And what are the rules for a breaker block? Price should break below retest and should respect basically the high of the breaker block. In other words, for it to be utilized as a potential trade or as a high probability trade, once you've executed within the breaker block, price should basically respect the high of the breaker block. In other words, price should not close above the breaker block. For example, if a bar was to move up, it should not close above the breaker block's high. It can wick above. It's still regarded as valid once price wicks above. And a few additions to how a breaker block is utilized for entries within the breaker block range, right? We simply look for a fair value gap in which we utilize this as an entry. So within, let me make this purple like this. Within this breaker block range, we look for a fair value gap to have formed, but preferably within the same time frame. So in other words, like this. Hope this makes sense. Let's make this red. Then let's make it times 4. Let's make it thick. Like that. So basically, a fair value gap should form within the breaker block, and we utilize this as an entry going bearish. Price can wick above the breaker block's high, but should not close above it. So if you were to be in a trade and you somehow potentially like monitoring it or watching it, it's highly recommended, or I personally, how I would utilize this is that if price closes above the breaker block, I would manually close my trade, and more often my trade stop loss will be placed above the recent high or potential order block that has formed within this push down, an order block above the fair value gap or a fair value gap above this fair value gap. So any forms of order blocks or fair value gaps that form above the entry fair value gap, those would be my stop loss zone, preferably 50% of the fair value gap. Basically, so in example, half of the fair value gap's range, that's where my stop loss would be, if that makes any sense. So if you basically watching how price moves above and respects the high of the order block, price should just basically not close above, or you'd manually close it. And also be in mind, you do not mainly have to have a fair value gap forming within the range for you to execute a trade. Preferably, I just prefer it happening like that. So like now, let me just show you in live price what a breaker block is identified. Okay, let's go. Here's a clean chart, and I would recommend you pausing right here and try identifying an order block, a breaker block that formed within this range going bearish. So kindly pause the video and try identifying where an order block is. Okay, here we go. This is basically our breaker block, the last bearish candle before the potential break of the high, which is this right here. We'd identify this as a break of buy side. Price drops and then breaks out of this low right here, and then this is the last bearish before this bullish move right here. So as soon as this candlestick is formed, price within this zone, basically for entries, we would utilize fair value gaps that are within the range, which is this as the highest probability entries, if that makes any sense. Something like this. So if you were to execute a trade within here, potentially your entry would be something like this, and then there's a fair value gap right here. Might not be as clear, but this would be potentially your stop loss. Half of it, something like this. So potentially this whole move could have been what you were targeting, somewhere within this range. Potentially maybe you were targeting this fair value gap right here, whatever, like this. This could have been your move pushing bearish. So basically this is simply how an breaker block is identified. Basically, within key reversal areas, price should respect the last bearish bar before the break of the most recent high. Then once price breaks the displacement low, it should formulate some form of a fair value gap within the breaker block or below it, or it can be off or above by just a few pips. It's still relevant, I would say. Price can, once you execute a trade based on your fair value gap, price can move or toggle above the breaker block, but should not close above it. So in other words, if price was to do that, you would manually close your trade, or personally I would. So yeah, basically that's how we identify and utilize breaker blocks. If you found this video helpful, please be sure to subscribe. Drop a comment if you need any advice or you want me to be a bit more clear about something. And enjoy the rest of your day.